The kitchen holds me like a secret at 2:13 in the morning. I stand here in the blue-white glow of the refrigerator, my bare feet against the cold linoleum, and I can hear the hum of the appliance mixing with the distant sound of Marcus breathing upstairs. The light cuts across my face in sharp angles, and I know I should close the door. I know I should go back to bed. But my hand moves past the milk carton, past the leftover takeout containers, and finds the spine of that old cookbook wedged between condiment bottles. I haven't touched this book in years. The cover is worn soft at the edges, and when I pull it free, a photograph slips loose and flutters toward the floor. I catch it before it lands, and suddenly I am looking at last summer again. Marcus and me on the fire escape, beer bottles sweating between our knees, the city sprawling behind us in that golden hour when everything looks forgiven. His arm is draped over my shoulder like it belongs there, like it had always belonged there, and his head is tilted back in laughter at something I must have said, something I can no longer remember. My thumb traces the edge of the photograph, and the paper is soft from handling. I must have looked at this picture more than I care to admit. In the image, I am smiling too, but it is the kind of smile I rarely allow myself anymore. Open, unguarded, the kind of smile that suggests I believed, even for that moment, that I deserved the warmth of another person pressed against my side. I close the cookbook but keep the photograph in my palm. Upstairs, Marcus shifts in his sleep, and the old floorboards creak in a language I have learned to translate over 4 years of living beneath the same roof. A restless turn, a soft exhale, the whisper of sheets against skin. I stare at the ceiling and count the seconds of silence that stretch between us. Even now, even with him unconscious and me standing alone in the refrigerator light like some kind of midnight ghost. The memory arrives without invitation, the way they always do. Earlier tonight, I had been washing dishes when a door slammed somewhere in the hallway outside our apartment. The sound cracked through the air like a gunshot, and suddenly I was 8 years old again, pressed against my bedroom wall, while my father's voice thundered through the house. That word, that terrible word he used to spit at me before I even understood what I was supposed to be ashamed of. Faggot. The syllables still land in my chest like broken glass, even after all these years. I had dropped the plate I was holding. It shattered against the kitchen floor in sharp, white pieces, and I stood there trembling, my hands dripping with soap and water. That is when Marcus appeared in the doorway. He took in the scene without asking questions, without demanding explanations I could not give. He simply looked at me with those steady brown eyes and said he was safe with me. For words spoken so quietly they might have been a prayer. I had not expected him to cross the kitchen. I had not expected the careful way he stepped around the broken ceramic, or how he placed his hands on my shoulders like he was anchoring something that might otherwise drift away. I had not expected the arms that wrapped around me, or how they stayed there while I shook against his chest, breathing in the smell of his skin and the faint trace of the cologne he wears to work. I had not expected any of it, and that is what undoes me now as I stand in the refrigerator light, holding this photograph like evidence of something I am too afraid to name. Because in that embrace, something shifted. Not in the dramatic way of movies or the novels I design covers for, but in the quiet way that tectonic plates move beneath the surface of the earth. Slow, inevitable, dangerous. The refrigerator hums louder now, or maybe I am just more aware of every sound in this sleeping house. I slip the photograph back into the cookbook and return it to its place among the bottles and jars. But when I close the refrigerator door, the darkness that rushes in feels different somehow. Charged, as if the air itself is holding its breath, waiting for something to break open or break apart. I make my way back toward the stairs, my hand trailing along the wall for guidance. Above me, Marcus sleeps on, and I wonder if he dreams of fire escapes in summer evenings, if he dreams of the weight of another person leaning into his warmth. I wonder if he remembers the way my body went still in his arms tonight, the way I seemed to disappear and return all at once. But mostly, as I climb toward my own room, I wonder what it means that I can still feel the phantom pressure of his hands on my back, still hear the rhythm of his breathing against my ear. I wonder what it means that for the first time in years, I do not feel like I am disappearing at all. I am 33 years old, and I have spent most of those years learning how to be invisible. Not in the dramatic sense of someone hiding from the world, but in the quiet way of someone who has never quite figured out how to take up space. I design book covers for small publishing houses, work that allows me to live at the edges of other people's stories without having to examine my own too closely. My apartment is on the second floor of a narrow row house in Philadelphia, and the light here is warm and forgiving, filtering through old windows that face east toward the morning sun. The furniture is mismatched in the way of someone who has never planned a life, only accumulated one piece at a time. A blue velvet armchair I found at a thrift store. A wooden coffee table Marcus built in the basement one weekend when he was avoiding grading papers. Bookshelves that sag under the weight of novels I have read and reread, their spines worn soft from handling. Everything here has been chosen for comfort rather than style, and the result is a space that feels lived in rather than curated. Oatmeal, my cat, claims the patch of sunlight by the kitchen window each morning. She is orange and impossibly round, with the kind of self-possession I have always envied. She appeared on our fire escape 2 winters ago, a stray who decided we were worth keeping, and Marcus insisted we take her in. I had protested, said we were not prepared for the responsibility, but Marcus was already opening a can of tuna, already making space. My days follow a pattern I have refined over years of careful practice. Coffee at 6:30, always in the same blue mug. 20 minutes with the newspaper, though I rarely retain what I read. Shower by 7:15, dressed, and at my desk by 8. I work in the small room that was meant to be a dining room, surrounded by sketches and color palettes and the quiet hum of the computer. Lunch at 12:30, usually something simple that does not require much attention. Marcus often leaves leftovers in the refrigerator with notes attached, small kindnesses that I have learned not to read too much into. I avoid conflict the way some people avoid allergens, with a careful attention to triggers and warning signs. Raised voices make my chest tighten. Slammed doors send me back to childhood rooms where I learned to make myself small. I have perfected the art of agreement, of smoothing over rough edges before they can cut anyone. It is easier this way, I tell myself. Safer. But the truth is more complicated than safety. The truth is that I have never said the words I am gay aloud, not once in 33 years of knowing them to be true. The closest I came was in college, with a boy named Ellis who had dark hair and gentle hands and a way of looking at me that made me feel seen for the first time in my life. We would study together in the library until it closed, then walk back to the dorms through the autumn darkness, our shoulders brushing with each step. I remember the night I almost told him. We were sitting on his narrow dormitory bed, textbooks scattered around us like fallen leaves, and he was explaining something about Renaissance art with the kind of passion that made his eyes bright. I watched his mouth move around the words, watched the way his hands gestured in the air, and I felt something crack open in my chest. The words were there, waiting on my tongue. I like you. I think I might love you. I am not who everyone thinks I am. But Ellis transferred to Chicago at the end of the semester, chasing a better program and better opportunities, and I folded that story into a mental drawer labeled Almosts. It has stayed there ever since, gathering dust alongside all the other chances I have been too afraid to take. Now I live with Marcus, and have for 4 years. He is 35, tall in the way that makes doorways seem smaller, with the kind of easy kindness that draws people to him without effort. He teaches history at a local high school, comes home with stories about teenagers who remind him why he chose this work in the first place. On weekends, he plays guitar in the living room, his fingers finding melodies that drift through the apartment like smoke. He leaves post-it notes everywhere, reminders about groceries and utility bills, but also terrible puns that make me smile despite myself. Don't forget to buy milk, because life is better when it's not utter chaos. Pick up the dry cleaning, or our clothes will be pressed for time. Small jokes that most people would find annoying, but I have come to treasure them as evidence that someone thinks of me when I am not in the room. Everyone assumes Marcus is straight, and I have never questioned it. Why would I? He dates women with names like Sarah and Jennifer, takes them to dinner and concerts and weekend trips I hear about in careful, edited summaries. They are always lovely, he says. Smart and funny and kind. But they never last long, these relationships, and I have learned not to ask why. We split the rent down the middle, share meals when our schedules align, watch films on Friday nights while oatmeal purrs between us on the couch. Marcus chooses action movies and comedies, stories with clear heroes and satisfying endings. I prefer quieter films, the kind where people stare out windows and make decisions that change everything. We take turns, and somehow it works. Our apartment fills with small comforts throughout the day. Jazz plays from the old record player Marcus inherited from his grandmother, the kind of music that makes even ordinary moments feel cinematic. Coffee brews before sunrise, filling the kitchen with warmth and the promise of another day survived. We share silence that has come to feel like home, the kind of quiet that exists between people who have learned each other's rhythms. But beneath all of this domesticity, beneath the easy routine of shared space and gentle coexistence, I ache. Quietly. Constantly. It is the kind of ache that does not announce itself with drama or demand immediate attention. Instead, it sits in my chest like a second heartbeat, so persistent I sometimes forget it was not always there. It is the ache of wanting something I cannot name, of loving someone who will never love me back, of being 33 years old and still waiting for my life to begin. I have become an expert at carrying this weight without showing it. I smile when Marcus tells me about his dates, offer advice I do not mean, listen to stories about women who get to touch him in ways I never will. I make space for his happiness even when it crowds out my own, because that is what good friends do. That is what good roommates do. That is what people do when they understand their place in the world and do not ask for more than they deserve. Most days, I convince myself this is enough. Most days, I tell myself that loving Marcus from this careful distance is better than not loving him at all. Most days, I believe that some people are meant to want and others are meant to be wanted, and I have simply drawn the shorter stick. But some nights, like tonight, standing in the refrigerator light with the memory of his arms around me still fresh on my skin, I wonder what might happen if I stopped being so careful. If I stopped making myself small. If I stop pretending that this ache is something I can carry forever without eventually breaking under its weight. The letter arrives on a Tuesday morning, slipped through the mail slot while I am upstairs working. The envelope is cream-colored and formal, the kind that carries news you are never quite prepared to receive. When I open it, my aunt's familiar handwriting stares back at me from beyond whatever boundary separates the living from the gone. She had written it weeks before she died, her words careful and measured in the way of someone who knows their time is short. Aunt Margaret was my father's sister, but she possessed none of his hardness. She was the one who sent birthday cards when my parents forgot, who called to check on my grades in college, who never asked why I never brought anyone home for holidays. In the letter, she tells me she has left me her collection of first edition novels, books she knew I would treasure in ways her other relatives could not understand. She asks me to come to the memorial service, says she hopes I will remember her with kindness. I sit at the kitchen table with the letter in my hands, and I realize I am crying. Not the dramatic tears of movies, but the quiet kind that slip down your cheeks before you notice they have started. Marcus finds me there when he comes home from work, his teaching bag slung over his shoulder, his hair mussed from the October wind. He reads the situation in the way he has learned to read me over 4 years of careful observation. He sets down his bag, pours himself a glass of water, and waits. I hand him the letter without speaking, watch his eyes move across the page with the same attention he gives to his students' essays. When he finishes reading, he sets the letter gently on the table and looks at me with those steady brown eyes that have become my anchor in ways I have never allowed myself to fully acknowledge. He tells me he is sorry for my loss, says my aunt sounds like she was a remarkable woman. Then, without hesitation, he says he will drive me to the memorial, that I should not have to go alone. I protest immediately, the way I always do when someone offers me something I want too much to accept safely. I tell him it is just 2 days, that I can manage the drive myself, that he has papers to grade and lesson plans to prepare. But Marcus has a way of softening the edges of my arguments before they can fully form. He says his students can survive without him for 2 days, that the drive to upstate Pennsylvania is long, and I should not make it while grieving. What he does not say, but what I hear in the spaces between his words, is that he knows where I am going. He knows about the town where I learned to hate myself, about the people who taught me that love was something to be ashamed of. He has never asked me directly about my childhood, but he has seen the way I flinch at certain sounds, the way I go quiet when families are mentioned, the way I hold myself like someone who has learned not to take up too much space. We leave Friday morning in Marcus's car, a reliable sedan that smells like coffee and the vanilla air freshener that hangs from his rearview mirror. The drive is 3 hours of Pennsylvania countryside, rolling hills that grow steeper as we move away from the city. Marcus plays music from a playlist he has made for long drives, songs with gentle melodies that fill the silence without demanding conversation. I watch the landscape change outside my window and feel myself growing smaller with each mile. This is the town where I stopped being myself, where I learned to bury the parts of me that did not fit into the neat categories my father had mapped out for his son. As we drive past the sign that welcomes visitors to a place that never felt like home, I realize my hands are clenched in my lap. The memorial service is held in the same church where I was once told to pray away my feelings. I am 17 again, sitting in the pastor's office while he explains that my soul is in danger, that my thoughts are not natural, that God can fix what is broken in me if I have enough faith. The wooden pews look smaller than I remember, but the weight of judgment feels exactly the same. My aunt's friends and neighbors fill the sanctuary, people I recognize from a childhood I have spent years trying to forget. They speak about her kindness, her generosity, her quiet faith that never felt the need to condemn others for their differences. It is a beautiful service, and I am grateful that she is being remembered with love. But I sit in the back row with Marcus beside me, and I count the minutes until I can escape. At the wake, held in the church basement with fluorescent lights and folding tables, the ghosts of my past take human form. Mrs. Henderson, who taught Sunday school and once told my mother that boys who did not play sports properly were cause for concern. Mr. Davis, who owned the hardware store and used to watch me with suspicion when I came in with my father. They approach me with careful smiles and polite questions about my life in Philadelphia. It is Mr. Davis who delivers the blow I have been dreading since we arrived. He claps me on the shoulder with false heartiness and asks about my work, nods approvingly when I mention book design. Then he tilts his head with the kind of calculated curiosity that I remember from childhood, and he says, "Quiet, Julian, still not married, huh?" The words land like a physical weight in my chest, and somewhere behind him, people laugh. Not cruel laughter, exactly, but the kind that comes from shared understanding, from a community that has decided what normal looks like and finds amusement in those who fall short. I force a smile and make some excuse about focusing on my career, about not having found the right person yet. The lie tastes bitter in my mouth, but it is easier than the truth. Easier than explaining that I have found the right person, that he is standing 3 feet away talking to the pastor about teaching methods, that he drove me here because he knew I needed someone who would not ask questions I cannot answer. Later, at the motel on the edge of town, we check into a room with 2 twin beds and air conditioning that rattles like old bones. The carpet is brown and worn thin in places, and the bedspread has the kind of pattern that was designed to hide stains. Marcus sets our bags on the dresser and immediately begins opening windows, letting in the cool October air. I sit on the edge of my bed and feel the weight of the day settling into my shoulders. The service was beautiful, but being in that town again has opened wounds I thought had healed years ago. I think about Mr. Davis and his casual cruelty, about the laughter that followed his words, about the way I smiled and nodded like their judgment did not matter. That is when I break. Just a little. A single tear that slides down my cheek before I can stop it. I turn away quickly, hoping Marcus will not notice, but he sees everything. He always sees everything. He does not say anything, does not ask if I am okay, or try to fill the silence with comfort I am not ready to receive. Instead, he simply acknowledges my pain without trying to fix it. That night, as we prepare for sleep in our separate beds, I notice Marcus pushing his bed an inch closer to mine. It is such a small gesture, barely noticeable, but it feels like a hand extended across an impossible distance. It feels like someone saying you do not have to carry this alone. We drive back to Philadelphia in comfortable silence, the kind that exists between people who have shared something difficult and survived it together. The countryside passes by in reverse, hills flattening into suburbs, suburbs giving way to the familiar skyline of home. I watch Marcus's hands on the steering wheel. Notice the way he glances at me periodically as if making sure I am still there. An hour from home, he asks a question so quiet I almost miss it. He asks if I was in love with him. Not Ella specifically, because Marcus does not know that name, but the him that exists in all the spaces I have never filled with words. The him that represents every chance I have been too afraid to take, every truth I have been too scared to speak. I do not answer, because there are some questions that carry their own responses in the silence that follows them. But Marcus nods anyway, his eyes still on the road, and I understand that he has heard everything I cannot say. In that moment, something shifts between us. Not dramatically, not with fanfare or declaration, but in the quiet way that seasons change, so gradually you do not notice until you wake up one morning and the world looks different. The shift shows itself in small ways over the following days. In the way his hand brushes my shoulder when he passes me coffee in the morning, the touch lingering a heartbeat longer than necessary. In the length of eye contact we share across the dinner table, conversations happening in glances that we have never allowed ourselves before. In the unspoken I see you that begins to grow between us like something planted in soil that has finally been turned. I do not know what it means yet, this new awareness that hums in the air whenever we are in the same room. But I know that something has changed, that the trip to my childhood town has cracked something open that cannot be closed again. For the first time in my life, I wonder if the person I have been in love with for 4 years might be capable of loving me back. Back home, the apartment feels different. Not in any way I can name or point to specifically, but different the way air feels before a storm, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. The same furniture sits in the same places. Oatmeal still claims her patch of morning sunlight, and our routines continue with the careful precision of a well-rehearsed dance. But something has shifted in the spaces between us, in the weight of glances and the length of pauses, in the way ordinary moments suddenly feel fragile and important. I find myself watching Marcus more closely than I ever have before. Not staring, exactly, but paying attention in ways that feel both natural and dangerous. I notice how he chews the end of his pen when he is grading papers at the kitchen table, his forehead creased in concentration as he considers how to phrase feedback that will encourage rather than discourage. I watch the way he leans into the kitchen counter when he listens, his body angled toward whoever is speaking as if he is trying to catch not just their words but their meaning. I see how he sits closer to me on the couch now during our Friday movie nights, his leg brushing against mine and staying there, a warm pressure that I feel long after the credits roll. The awareness is exhausting and exhilarating in turns. I catch myself holding my breath when he passes behind my chair, hyper-aware of the space between his body and mine. I find excuses to be in the kitchen when he is cooking, offering to help with tasks I have never shown interest in before, just so I can watch his hands work and listen to him hum under his breath. Every interaction feels loaded with subtext I am afraid to interpret too generously, but also afraid to ignore completely. We talk more than we used to, conversations that stretch longer into the evening and venture into territories we have always avoided. It begins with small things, observations about the day or comments about the news, but somehow we find ourselves discussing larger questions. Fear, expectations, the weight of other people's assumptions about who we are supposed to be. One evening in late October, Marcus tells me about his father. Not the sanitized version he usually shares, about the man who taught him to play guitar and took him camping in the Adirondacks, but the harder truth underneath. He describes a man who believed that emotions were weakness, that boys who cried or showed tenderness were somehow defective. Marcus was 12 when his father found him playing house with the girl next door, taking the role of the mother while she played the father. The game ended abruptly, and Marcus never played it again. I listen to this story while we sit at opposite ends of the couch, a bowl of popcorn growing cold between us, and I feel something crack open in my chest. Not just sympathy for the boy Marcus was, but recognition. The understanding that passes between people who have learned to hide the same parts of themselves, who have been taught that certain kinds of love are not acceptable, that certain ways of being in the world are too dangerous to risk. In return, I find myself sharing pieces of my own story that I have never spoken aloud. I tell him about the time my father found me playing with my mother's jewelry when I was 7, how he threw it all away, and told me that boys who wanted to be pretty would never amount to anything. I described the youth pastor who pulled me aside after Sunday service to ask if I had ever had impure thoughts about other boys, how I lied, and said no while my face burned with shame. I talk about the years of learning to watch other men without looking like I was watching, of training myself to respond appropriately when they talked about women, of perfecting the art of being invisible even to myself. Marcus listens without interrupting, without offering the kind of empty reassurances that would cheapen what I am trying to tell him. When I finish, he simply nods and says he is sorry that I had to learn to hide so early. Then he reaches across the couch and squeezes my hand, just once, before letting go. These conversations happen gradually, over weeks that blur together in a haze of increasing intimacy. We do not plan them, but they seem to arise naturally from the new honesty that has settled between us since our trip. I begin to understand that Marcus carries his own weight of unspoken truths, his own collection of almosts and what-ifs that he has never examined too closely. He tells me about David, his best friend from childhood. They were inseparable from age 8 to 14, boys who shared everything from baseball cards to secrets to the kind of physical affection that stops being acceptable once others start paying attention. They would lie in Marcus's backyard on summer nights, staring up at the stars and talking about their dreams. Sometimes David would reach over and take his hand, and Marcus would let him, would hold on like he was anchoring something precious to the earth. Marcus never says explicitly that he loved David, but I hear it in the way his voice changes when he speaks about him, in the careful distance he maintains from the memory. David's family moved away the summer before high school, and they promised to write, to stay in touch, to remain best friends despite the miles between them. But teenage life intervened, and the letters grew shorter and less frequent until they stopped altogether. Marcus never saw him again. As he tells me this story, I watch his profile in the lamplight and wonder if he knows what he is really telling me. If he understands that this memory of boyhood love is a gift he is offering, a door he is opening just wide enough for me to glimpse the person he might have been in a different world, with different rules. The shift in our dynamic reveals itself in other small ways that accumulate like snow, insignificant individually, but transformative in their totality. Marcus starts touching me more often, casual contacts that feel anything but casual. His hand on my shoulder when he passes behind my chair. His fingers brushing mine when he hands me coffee. The way he sits close enough on the couch that I can feel the warmth radiating from his skin. He begins asking about my work in ways that suggest genuine interest rather than polite roommate conversation. He wants to know about the covers I am designing, the stories I am trying to capture in visual form. When I show him my latest project, a literary novel about two men finding each other in post-war London, he studies the image carefully and tells me it captures something essential about longing. The word hangs in the air between us, and I wonder if he means it the way I hear it. But it is the conversations that feel most dangerous, the way we have begun sharing the fears we have carried alone for so long. We talk about fathers who did not know how to love complicated sons, about churches that taught us to be afraid of ourselves, about the exhaustion of pretending to be someone you are not, day after day, year after year, until you almost forget who you really are underneath all the performance. One evening in November, after we have talked until nearly midnight about the ways we learn to hide, I hear myself saying something I have never admitted to anyone. I tell Marcus that I have never really let anyone in. Not completely. Not even Ellis, who came closest to seeing me clearly. I explain how I have spent my entire adult life keeping people at a safe distance, close enough to avoid loneliness, but far enough away to avoid the kind of intimacy that might require me to reveal too much. Marcus is quiet for a long time after I say this, and I wonder if I have pushed too hard, shared too much. But then he looks at me with those steady brown eyes and tells me he understands. He says he has done the same thing, built walls so carefully that even he sometimes forgets they are there. We go to bed that night without saying anything more, but something has been acknowledged between us, some mutual recognition of the barriers we have constructed and the loneliness they create. I lie awake for hours thinking about his words, about the possibility that I am not the only one who has been afraid to let someone see who I really am. The next morning, I find a note stuck to the refrigerator when I come down for coffee. Marcus has already left for work, but his handwriting is unmistakable on the small piece of paper. You do not have to let anyone in all at once, it says. Just crack the door. I stare at that note until my coffee grows cold, reading it over and over until the words lose their individual meaning and become something larger. An invitation, a promise, a gentle suggestion that perhaps I do not have to choose between total isolation and complete vulnerability, that there might be a middle ground where two people can meet each other slowly, carefully, without rushing toward destinations they are not ready to reach. I leave the note where it is and carry its message with me throughout the day. Every time I pass through the kitchen, I see those words again, and each time they feel more like a key than a suggestion. A way to unlock something I have kept carefully guarded for 33 years. That evening, when Marcus comes home from work, I am still thinking about the note. I have spent the day working on a book cover, but my attention kept drifting to the idea of doors and thresholds, of the difference between letting someone in and simply allowing them to see that there is something inside worth discovering. We eat dinner together as we always do, but the conversation feels different now, more intentional. Marcus tells me about a student who is struggling with an essay about identity, about how to help someone find their voice when they have been taught to stay quiet. I tell him about the book I am designing, about trying to capture the moment when someone stops running from who they are and begins moving toward who they might become. Neither of us mentions the note directly, but it sits between us like a third presence at the table, a reminder that we are both trying to figure out how to be more honest, how to be more present, how to stop hiding from the people who matter most. Later, as we sit together watching a movie neither of us is really paying attention to, I realize that something fundamental has changed. The door Marcus wrote about is not just metaphorical anymore. It is real, and it is beginning to open, slowly and carefully, but undeniably. For the first time in my life, I am allowing someone to see me clearly, and instead of running away, they are choosing to stay. The nightmare comes on a Tuesday night in November, the same one that has haunted me since childhood but returns with particular cruelty whenever I allow myself to become too vulnerable too quickly. I am 8 years old again, standing in my parents' living room while my father towers over me, his face twisted with the kind of rage that comes from disappointment so deep it feels like betrayal. In the dream, he has found the drawings I made of boys from my class, innocent sketches that somehow revealed more than I intended. His voice fills the room like thunder, calling me names I am still learning to understand, telling me I am broken in ways that cannot be fixed. I wake gasping, my heart hammering against my ribs like something trying to escape. The sheets are damp with sweat, and for a moment I cannot remember where I am, cannot distinguish between the child in the dream and the man lying in this narrow bed. The familiar weight of shame settles on my chest, heavy and suffocating, and I curl into myself the way I learned to do when I was small and afraid and had nowhere else to hide. That is when I hear the footsteps in the hallway. Soft, careful steps that pause outside my door before continuing toward the bathroom. Marcus is awake, probably getting a glass of water, and I hold my breath hoping he will not notice the light seeping under my door, will not realize that I am lying here, shaking like a child afraid of shadows. But Marcus has always been attuned to the subtle sounds of distress, the way teachers learn to hear what their students are not saying. The footsteps stop, then return, and there is a gentle knock on my door. He asks if I am okay, his voice low and careful, designed not to startle. I want to tell him I am fine. I want to use the polite lie I have perfected over years of hiding my damaged places from the people who care about me. But my voice comes out cracked and small when I tell him he can come in, and I know he will see through whatever facade I try to construct. Marcus opens the door slowly, giving me time to object if I need to. He is wearing an old t-shirt and pajama pants, his hair mussed from sleep, and there is something about seeing him this way, unguarded and concerned, that makes my chest tighten with an emotion I am not ready to name. He takes in the scene without judgment, the rumpled sheets and my pale face, and the way I am holding myself like something that might break if handled too roughly. He crosses the room and sits on the edge of my bed without asking permission, the mattress dipping slightly under his weight. I can smell his familiar scent, soap and something warm and entirely him, and it grounds me in ways I did not know I needed. He does not immediately ask what happened or try to fill the silence with reassurances I am not ready to hear. He simply sits there, present and patient, waiting for me to find my words. When I finally speak, my voice sounds hollow even to my own ears. I tell him it is stupid, that I am fine, that he should go back to bed and not worry about me. The words feel rehearsed because they are the same script I have used countless times to deflect concern and maintain the careful distances that keep me safe. But even as I say them, I know they sound as empty as they feel. Marcus does not move from his place on the edge of my bed. He does not nod politely and excuse himself the way most people would when faced with someone clearly lying about their emotional state. Instead, he looks at me with those steady brown eyes that have become my anchor, and he tells me quietly that I am not fine, that whatever I am experiencing is not stupid, that I do not have to pretend with him. The gentleness in his voice nearly undoes me. I have spent so many years being told that my fears are irrational, my pain insignificant, my needs too much to ask others to carry. But Marcus speaks to me like someone who understands that nightmares are not just dreams, that some wounds never fully heal, that the child who learned to be afraid does not simply disappear when the man grows tall enough to defend himself. Then he says something that changes everything. 2 words, spoken so softly I almost miss them. "Come here," he says, and it is not a command or a request but an invitation. An offer of comfort that asks nothing in return, that expects nothing except my willingness to accept it. I hesitate because accepting comfort has never come easily to me. I have trained myself to be self-sufficient, to handle my own emotional weather without asking others to share the storm. But something in Marcus's voice, something in the way he sits there patient and unmovable, makes me want to try trusting someone with my brokenness. I move toward him slowly, uncertain of what he is offering or what he expects in return. But Marcus makes it easy, the way he makes everything easy. He opens his arms and pulls me in, not like a friend offering casual comfort, not like a brother providing familial support, but like someone who understands that some kinds of pain require a different quality of holding. His arms wrap around me with a certainty that takes my breath away. One hand settles between my shoulder blades, the other cups the back of my head, and suddenly I am anchored to something solid in a way I have never experienced before. This is not the awkward half-embrace of casual friendship or the brief pat on the back that says everything is fine when nothing is fine. This is the kind of holding that says you matter, you are safe, you do not have to carry this alone. I do not speak because there are no words for what is happening in my chest, for the way something that has been clenched tight for 33 years is finally beginning to loosen. Instead, I let myself melt into his embrace, let my forehead rest against his shoulder, let my breathing slow to match the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against my ear. In the safety of his arms, the truth rises like a tide I can no longer hold back. I love him. The words echo in my mind with the clarity of revelation, no longer a possibility I am afraid to examine, but a fact as fundamental as gravity. I love Marcus in ways that encompass friendship but extend far beyond it, in ways that make me want to build a life around the sound of his laughter, in ways that make me want to wake up every morning knowing he will be there. But more than that, more impossible and more terrifying and more wonderful than my own feelings, is the growing certainty that he knows. That this embrace is not just comfort offered to a friend in distress, but something more intentional, more intimate, more laden with unspoken meaning. The way he holds me speaks a language I am only beginning to understand, but the message feels unmistakable. You are not alone. You are seen. You are wanted. And maybe, the thought whispers through my mind like a prayer I am afraid to speak aloud. Maybe he feels it too. Maybe the careful distance we have maintained for 4 years has been protection not just for me, but for both of us. Maybe the women he dates are placeholders for something he wants, but has been too afraid to reach for. Maybe the way he has been looking at me since we returned from my hometown, the increased touching and longer conversations and notes about doors, has been his own careful way of saying what I have been too scared to hear. I close my eyes and let myself imagine, just for this moment, what it might be like to love someone who loves me back. To wake up in the morning and not have to hide the way my face changes when he walks into the room. To reach for his hand without calculating whether the gesture will reveal too much. To build a life that does not require me to pretend to be someone I am not. The possibility feels too large to hold, too fragile to examine too closely. But here in his arms, with his heart beating steady against my ear and his breath warm in my hair, it feels real enough to hope for. Real enough to believe that maybe, after 33 years of loving carefully and quietly and alone, I might finally have found someone brave enough to love me back. Marcus does not ask me to explain the nightmare or promise that everything will be fine or offer any of the empty reassurances that would cheapen this moment. He simply holds me while the last of the fear drains away, replaced by something I have never dared to feel before. Safety, belonging, the radical possibility that I might be worthy of the kind of love I have spent my entire life believing was meant for other people. When I finally pull back enough to look at his face, I see something in his expression that makes my breath catch. Not pity or concern or the careful neutrality of friendship, but something warmer and more complex. Something that looks like recognition. Like he is seeing me clearly for the first time, and what he sees does not make him want to run away. We do not say anything more that night because some revelations are too important for words, too precious to risk damaging with clumsy attempts at explanation. But as Marcus helps me settle back under the covers, as he smooths the sheet over my shoulders with the kind of tenderness usually reserved for children or lovers, I understand that something has shifted permanently between us. The door I have been too afraid to open for 33 years has not just cracked, it has swung wide. And instead of the judgment and rejection I have always feared finding on the other side, there is Marcus. Patient, kind Marcus, who has been waiting for me to trust him with the truth of who I am. As I drift towards sleep, calmer than I have been in weeks, I allow myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, tomorrow I will find the courage to tell him what I have discovered in the safety of his arms. That I love him, that I think he might love me too. That perhaps we can build something together that is more honest and more beautiful than the careful friendship we have been maintaining all these years. In the morning, doubt creeps in the way it always does when daylight makes the previous night's revelations seem impossible. I wake with the memory of Marcus's arms around me still vivid on my skin, but in the harsh clarity of November sunshine streaming through my bedroom window, I begin to question everything I thought I understood. Maybe he was just being kind. Maybe the intimacy I felt was nothing more than one friend comforting another through a difficult moment. Maybe I have spent so many years wanting something that I have convinced myself it exists where it does not. The fear arrives slowly at first, then all at once. What if I misread the way he held me? What if the tenderness I heard in his voice was nothing more than the same compassion he would show any friend in distress? What if I have taken his kindness and twisted it into something it was never meant to be? The way desperate people sometimes mistake attention for affection, care for love. I begin pulling away without meaning to, the way a body recoils from heat before the mind can process the danger. It starts with small distances. I take my coffee to my office instead of sitting with Marcus at the kitchen table. I claim I have deadlines when he suggests watching a movie together. I start sleeping on the couch, telling him my bedroom is too warm, that I sleep better with the living room fan running. The lies come easily because I have had years of practice in the art of retreat. But the distances grow larger as the days pass. I avoid the kitchen when I hear him cooking, timing my movements through the apartment to minimize the chances of being alone together. I respond to his questions with polite brevity, the kind of surface-level conversation that reveals nothing and invites no deeper inquiry. When he tries to touch me, casual contacts that once felt like gifts, I find excuses to move away, to create space where there was once closeness. I tell myself I am protecting us both, that it is better to preserve our friendship by maintaining appropriate boundaries than to risk losing everything by wanting too much. That the moment in my bedroom was an aberration, a temporary lapse in judgment brought on by vulnerability and fear, not a foundation on which to build impossible hopes. But even as I construct these careful justifications, I know I am lying to myself. The truth is simpler and more frightening. I am pulling away because I am terrified that what happened between us was real, that the connection I felt was mutual, that Marcus might actually be capable of loving me the way I love him. Because if that is true, then I will have to choose between the safety of the life I have built and the terrifying possibility of something more. Marcus notices the change immediately because Marcus notices everything. He is too observant, too attuned to the rhythms of our shared life, not to see that I am disappearing even while still living in the same space. But he does not push it first, does not demand explanations or corner me with questions I am not ready to answer. Instead, he gives me room to retreat, perhaps hoping I will find my way back on my own. For a week, we exist in this careful choreography of avoidance. I leave for coffee before he wakes up. He stays late at school, grading papers and planning lessons that could easily be done at home. We pass each other in the hallway like polite strangers, exchanging pleasantries about the weather and mundane household concerns. Oatmeal seems confused by the sudden shift in our dynamics, moving between us with the kind of feline disappointment reserved for humans who have inexplicably stopped making sense. But Marcus's patience has limits, and I reach them on a Thursday evening when I decline his invitation to dinner for the third night in a row, claiming I have already eaten when we both know I have been surviving on coffee and whatever leftovers I can grab when he is not looking. He sets down the wooden spoon he was using to stir pasta sauce and turns to face me fully, his expression serious in a way that makes my stomach clench with anxiety. He asks if he did something wrong, and the question lands like a physical blow because it is so completely backward from the truth. He did everything right. He held me when I was breaking apart. He offered comfort without conditions. He saw me at my most vulnerable and did not run away. That is exactly the problem. I want to lie, to give him some easy excuse that will allow us both to pretend this conversation is not necessary. But something in his face stops me, some combination of hurt and determination that makes me realize he is not going to let me disappear without a fight. That he cares enough about what we had, whatever it was, to demand an explanation for why I am throwing it away. The words come out broken and clumsy, not at all the way I imagined I would say them if this moment ever arrived. I tell him that no, he did not do anything wrong, that he did everything right, and that is the problem. The confession spills out of me like water through a cracked dam, too fast to control or take back. I tell him I am in love with him, not just fond of him or grateful for his friendship, but in love in ways that make it difficult to breathe when he walks into a room. In love in ways that make me want to build a life around the sound of his laughter, in ways that make every casual touch feel like a gift I do not deserve. I explain that I have been in love with him for longer than I care to admit. Maybe since the beginning, but definitely since that night on the fire escape last summer when he draped his arm over my shoulder like it belonged there. And then I tell him about the night he held me, about how it felt different from friendship, about how I let myself believe for a few dangerous hours that maybe he felt something too. I explain that I have been pulling away because I am terrified that I imagined the whole thing, that I have taken his kindness and transformed it into something it was never meant to be. That I would rather lose him slowly through distance than all at once through rejection. When I finish speaking, the silence that follows feels enormous. Marcus stands by the stove with the wooden spoon still in his hand, pasta sauce cooling while he processes what I have just confessed. His face is unreadable in the way that makes my chest tight with panic, and I prepare myself for the gentle letdown. The careful explanation of why we can be friends, but nothing more. The suggestion that maybe I should find my own place to give us both some space to figure out how to navigate this new, uncomfortable truth. But then Marcus sets down the spoon and looks at me with those steady brown eyes that have anchored me through 4 years of careful friendship. And he says something that stops my heart completely. "I know," he says, and the words are so quiet I almost miss them. I can barely breathe around the question that follows. And I ask, because knowing and accepting are different things, because awareness does not necessarily mean reciprocation, because I need him to tell me explicitly whether this knowledge changes everything or nothing between us. Marcus is quiet for a long moment, and I can see him choosing his words carefully, the way he chooses everything carefully when it matters. He tells me he does not have all the answers, that he is still figuring out what these feelings mean and what he wants to do about them. But then he says something that makes the ground shift beneath my feet. He tells me that when he held me that night, when he pulled me into his arms and anchored me through the storm of my own fear, he meant it. Not as a friend offering comfort, not as a roommate fulfilling some obligation of care, but as someone who has been wanting to hold me for longer than he has allowed himself to acknowledge. He says that he has been afraid too, afraid of losing what we have, afraid of wanting something he was not sure he was allowed to want. The admission hangs between us like a bridge I am not sure I am brave enough to cross. Because this is the moment of choice, the place where I decide whether to trust that what I see in his eyes is real or to retreat back into the safety of assumption and distance. This is where I choose between the known quantity of quiet longing and the terrifying possibility of mutual love. Marcus seems to understand the weight of this moment because he does not rush to fill the silence. He lets me sit with his words, lets me process the idea that I am not alone in this feeling, that the love I have been carrying like a secret burden might actually be something shared rather than something endured. When he speaks again, his voice is even quieter than before, barely more than a whisper. "Let us just start there," he says, and I understand that he is offering not promises or certainty, but presence. The willingness to explore what this might become without demanding to know the destination before we begin the journey. For the first time in days, I meet his eyes directly, and what I see there is not the rejection I have been bracing for, but something that looks like hope. Tentative and careful, but real. The same hope that has been growing in my own chest despite my best efforts to contain it. I do not say yes immediately because yes feels too small for what he is offering, too simple for the complexity of what we are both risking. But I nod, and he nods back, and in that exchange something settles between us. Not certainty, but agreement. Not answers, but willingness to live with questions that we can explore together. The pasta sauce has gone cold on the stove, but neither of us mentions it. Instead, we stand in the kitchen that has been the center of our domestic life for 4 years, and we begin the careful work of reimagining what it might mean to love each other deliberately, openly, without the protective distance that has kept us safe, but also kept us separate. It feels like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that jumping will either destroy us or teach us how to fly. But for the first time in my life, I am not facing that choice alone. Morning light filters through the kitchen windows with the soft quality that only November can produce, pale and gentle and full of quiet promises. I stand at the counter making 2 mugs of coffee, and I realize I am humming. It is barely audible, more breath than sound, but it is there nonetheless. A habit I lost somewhere in the careful years of hiding, something I forgot I missed until this moment when it returns unbidden. The melody is nothing particular, just a thread of sound that rises from some place in my chest that has been silent for too long. I pour the coffee slowly, watching the steam curl upward in the morning air, and I understand that something fundamental has shifted overnight. Not in the dramatic way of stories that end with grand gestures, but in the quiet way that seasons change, so gradually you do not notice until you wake up one morning and the world looks different. I hear Marcus on the stairs, his footsteps familiar but somehow new. And when he appears in the doorway, I see that he looks different too. Tired, yes, because we talked until nearly 3 in the morning, sitting on opposite ends of the couch and trying to map the territory of what we might become. But there is something else in his face, something that looks like relief. The kind of peace that comes from finally setting down a weight you did not realize you were carrying. His hair is mussed from sleep, sticking up at odd angles in a way that makes me want to smooth it down with my fingers. His smile comes slowly, cautious but real, and when our eyes meet across the kitchen, I feel something settle in my chest that has been restless for years. "Good morning," he says, and the words carry more weight than they should, as if we are greeting not just a new day but a new version of ourselves. I hand him his coffee, and when our fingers touch around the ceramic handle, neither of us pulls away. We sit at the kitchen table where we have shared thousands of meals, but this morning feels like the first. No grand declarations, no desperate promises about forever, just presence, just the quiet acknowledgement that we are choosing to be here together, in this moment, without needing to know exactly what comes next. I watch Marcus wrap his hands around his mug, notice the way the steam fogs his glasses slightly, see how he blinks slowly like someone still waking up from a long dream. In the background, oatmeal purrs from her spot in the morning sunlight, and the record player hums with the gentle static that precedes music. Small sounds of a life continuing, unchanged in its rhythms, but transformed in its meaning. There are things we could say, questions we could ask about what this means, about how we navigate the space between friendship and something more, about what we tell the world and what we keep for ourselves. But none of that feels urgent now. What feels urgent is the simple act of being present with each other, of allowing this new honesty to settle between us like furniture in a room we are still learning to inhabit. I reach across the table and take his hand. Not dramatically, not with the weight of declaration or demand, but simply because I want to and because, for the first time, I believe I am allowed to want such things. His fingers are warm from the coffee mug, slightly calloused from years of guitar playing, and they fit around mine with the kind of certainty that makes me wonder why it took us so long to try this. He does not pull away. He does not look surprised or uncomfortable or regretful. Instead, he adjusts his grip slightly, threading our fingers together in a way that feels both new and utterly familiar, like something we have been practicing for without knowing it. We sit like this as the morning grows brighter around us, our hands joined across the small table that has witnessed so many careful conversations, so many moments of almost intimacy that we were too afraid to acknowledge. The record player clicks and begins spinning, filling the apartment with jazz that sounds like Sunday mornings and promises kept. I think about the photograph tucked in the cookbook, the one of us on the fire escape last summer when I still believed that loving Marcus was something I would have to do alone. I think about all the nights I stood in this kitchen feeling the weight of unspoken words, all the mornings I made coffee for two people who were pretending not to know what they meant to each other. But mostly, I think about Marcus's thumb tracing gentle circles across my knuckles, about the way he looks at our joined hands like he is seeing something miraculous, about how this moment does not need music swelling or cameras capturing the perfect angle to be the most important thing that has ever happened to me. The story I have been telling myself for 33 years is finally changing, not ending, because I understand now that love is not a destination but a daily choice, not a problem to be solved but a mystery to be lived, but changing from a story about wanting into a story about having, from a story about hiding into a story about being seen. Outside, the city moves through its morning rhythms, people rushing toward whatever waits for them in the day ahead. But inside, in this kitchen filled with warm light and the sound of two men breathing in synchrony, time moves differently, slower, more intentionally, like something worth savoring. I do not know what we will call this thing between us, or how we will explain it to the world, or what it will look like a year from now. But I know that Marcus is choosing to stay, that his hand in mine feels like the answer to a question I have been asking my whole life without knowing how to voice it. The coffee grows cold as we sit together, but neither of us moves to reheat it. Some moments are too important to interrupt with practicality, too fragile to disturb with anything other than presence and breath, and the revolutionary act of two people choosing each other, quietly, completely, one morning at a time.